think the environment has to be.
What we're saying is have a heart.
We've got to be able to regenerate our
There'll
economy.
be people who are kind, people who are cruel, but that's life. You can be bigoted about pigeons. I'm fine with that.
What's wrong with Singaporeans?
Let's first start with the word prostitution. Is it legal in Singapore?
Well, my understanding is that there's no penal provision which criminalizes prostitution per se. Prostitution meaning where a person solicits payment in exchange for sexual services. The offences seem
So
to...
does that make it legal if it is not mentioned as a crime? Does that mean prostitution is legal?
It just means that it is not illegal.
Okay.
I think there's a bit of a difference there. Because legally, when you say that it's legal, then it comes to a whole lot of implications that the system actually encourages it or is completely indifferent towards it. And I think as a matter of policy, I think the system discourages it. And I think even the discouraging is a controlled kind of discouraging where there are designated areas where there's controlled prostitution. So as to whether the fact that there's no penal provision that does not criminalize prostitution, whether that necessarily means that it is legal, I think that's open to debate.
But in practice, is it tolerated? Is it allowed?
In practice, my understanding is that it is tolerated in controlled areas. It is not tolerated in areas which are not controlled. For example, I think if you can't have streetwalkers who are openly, selling their sexual services, in a pedestrian mall, for example, so even then.
But this is no different from gambling. You can gamble in designated places. You can't gamble everywhere.
Yeah, you can't. Yes.
So the fact that it is allowed in certain places, there is no action taken against prostitutes if they operate within the bounds of accepted
Well, that's my understanding.
premises.
Yes, that's my understanding.
Braema,
Can I just add on to what he has shared? I think that there are licensed brothels, and this come under the Ministry of Home Affairs. And sex workers who work in these licensed brothels, I think the brothel owner must sort of take care of their conditions, whatever, and they must go. We are very practical in this area. They must go regularly for testing to make sure that they do not transmit any diseases, etc. So these are the licensed brothels. Have they increased? I am not sure. But anyone who, as you have said, solicits in the streets, I think some of it is that we do not see. And when somebody complains and there are one too many in the street, then there will be a vice raid that will take place. So in this area...
Okay, the vice raid is to catch the prostitutes or to catch the illegal activities related to prostitution?
I wish they would catch the pimps, but more often than not, they round up the workers.
Because they are not allowed to prostitute in the streets.
That's right. And many of them also turn up on a social visit pass.
Yes.
So when you're on a social visit pass, you are not supposed to be working as a sex worker. We make it a little bit. Prostitution has become so complex, right, today, that even the word prostitution is already quite problematic. Some of them are sex workers. They know what they are coming in for, and we just ask for good conditions for them. But some are prostitutes. So I think it has become very sophisticated, this whole area of sex work, that we have more lines emerging in this whole industry. So when we talk about vice raid, it is good, but sometimes some of us who work in the field, we say that the other part that takes place is it goes underground. And Singapore is very app savvy. It can go into the handphone, it can go into the computer. So okay, I'm not the women and the girls are going to appear in the mobile.
Yes.
much of the activity will go into the internet and the apps approach through mobile phones, etc.
But it going into the internet is not because there is a raid. That's a very convenient place
Yes,
to play with your ideas.
both. It's harder to track on the internet, I think, than to go physically into a street and watch what is happening. And they don't, the vice squads, to the best of my knowledge and anyone else who knows, is that they watch the street, they watch the activity, etc. But the pimps are very good, I think. Shih would know that they know how to pass the message like a runner's line all the way down, and everyone will scramble and disappear. So in the end, the persons who get caught are the women, and in some instances I use the word girls very deliberately. They are girls, they are underage.
Okay, you've touched on something that I'd really like to go into more deeply, but before we move into that, can we just say that although prostitution is not illegal and therefore allowed to be practiced in certain places, some of the activities surrounding prostitution is illegal, and this is where the law needs to take action. My question is, are we addressing the illegal activities around prostitution directly, or are we not? Perhaps I should ask another question. Are we trying to eradicate prostitution, or is prostitution something that must be allowed to stay?
This question is as old as prostitution itself. If we hit too hard on it, it will go underground. And if it goes underground, the women who are working in the industry may not be protected, may not have the protection if it goes underground.
Is it so straightforward? Because there are legal people, illegal prostitutes, who would go underground anyway.
There are unlicensed brothel, there are illegal prostitution, and a lot of the abuses, a lot of exploitation happens with women who are working with the unlicensed brothels, illegal, the pimps, the runners.
So now we're not talking of prostitution being wrong per se, but we are talking of the abuses within the industry that is allowed to continue that is wrong, and that is
Yes.
what you think should be corrected, not prostitution.
Yes, the abuses, the exploitation, those are the areas that we need to look into and address.
But what about prostitution itself? Is that a social activity that should be permitted?
It really depends on who you ask, right? If you're asking somebody to comment on that in the absence of moral norms that dictate behavior, then it's a free-for-all. Anybody can do whatever they want with their own bodies. If you were to ask somebody from perhaps the religious quarter, I suppose the answer would be, do unto others what you would have them do to you, maybe. So if I wouldn't want this for my mother or my sister or my grandmother, why should I want it for anybody else's mother, sister, or grandmother? And so you will get differing answers depending on who you ask, right? Yeah.
So from a religious viewpoint, from a moral viewpoint, it may not be desirable, but then from a social viewpoint,
We are not trying to eradicate prostitution, right? We see it as something, as you have cited earlier, that former Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew himself has seen it as something necessary. Yeah? Whether we agree with that is a separate question. But I think from state approach, it is not like we are trying to eradicate prostitution. The second part of your question about whether we should really work towards making prostitution legal or illegal, I think it's very difficult to answer, as everyone has said, the religious groups, etc., and the human rights aspect of it. If, let's say, a woman wants to, or a man, today we have men too, they wish to work in the sex industry and earn their money fast for whatever reasons best known to them, then all that we want from a rights-based perspective is that the conditions in which you work should not be exploitative. It should be clean and above board, meaning you should know for 1 hour what are your rates, etc., etc. Have we arrived there in Singapore? No, definitely not. There is a lot of subtext and a lot of different layers depending who, etc. But the more worrying thing in Singapore is not so much about this. Yes, we all know about the young 17-and-a-half-year-old girl and the 51 men and the sex with the minor. But I think the bigger problem that we have is the a number of women, girls, and boys are here who are coming in from our neighboring countries. We are almost like huge, there's a huge attraction here, and I think the social visit pass under which they come and they work as sex workers and they go back, how severely exploitative that it becomes, as Suresh has said, trafficked is our challenge now. Because if you are trafficked, there's a lot of force around the conditions under which you came here, the conditions under which you are operating, as well as the money you get in hand. This is really, I mean, we have stories of everyone who is in a shelter. The stories tell that they are trafficked, but what are the real numbers? How many? Nobody really knows.
Okay, but I want to discuss what Braema has brought about, which is that the activity of prostitution brings about a lot of abuse. And it is this abuse that we want to address, the abuse of being trafficked, the abuse of being treated badly, the abuse of underage sex and being forced into sex when you don't want to be a prostitute. Let's examine this in greater detail. We'll be back in a moment, discussing each topic one at a time.